Hello everyone, and welcome back to my educational series and speedrun on instructional rapid using basic principles. It's been a little bit since I've posted a video on this series, so trying to get back into it for the summer. I also moved, as you can probably tell by the background change, so been a little busy over here. But yeah, so we're getting back into it, and today I have a game to show you guys against an opponent that was 900 rated, and I was playing white. So I started off with d4. I've always been a d4 player for the most part, and they played e6, which is fine. c4, again, I always play the Queen's Gambit, just trying to get the center here, and they play c5. Knight f3, just developing my knight towards the center and also adding another defender for the pawn on d4, because if they do end up taking this pawn, I would like to take back with my knight, because if I end up taking back with my queen, that's kind of just opening up ideas for them to play knight c6, kick my queen back, and I'm just kind of losing time that I don't really have to lose. So just standard development, bringing my knight towards the center. And my opponent does the same thing as well. I bring out my other knight to the center. And here this kind of comes probably from a little lack of understanding opening ideas here. They play the move knight c6, which seems like a normal move at first because they're just developing towards the center. But what they lack is that move order. They need to take this pawn first before moving the knight out. And the reason why is because when they move their knight out first, like they did, they're keeping my pawn here in the center. And because I have support from my c4 pawn here, they're just welcoming me to push my pawn forward and start getting some tempo on this knight. So instead of this knight just sitting comfortably on c6, they now have to move to another square, all of which are less ideal than c6. For example, they can't move here because it's not a safe square. They can move back, but it's very passive. It blocks the bishop. If they move to d4, then I'm just going to simply take and win a pawn. And if they move to a5, knights on the rim are grim. It's going to be kind of sad in the corner. And they can go to b4, which is what they did. But again, what is this knight doing on b4? It's out of play. Again, I can attack the knight. And the last option is to just simply move back. And again, if it moves back, where is it going? So the better option for them is to take the pawn first. And after I take back, now they play the move knight c6. And this is kind of a normal position here. And they don't have to worry about my pawn kicking their knight out and losing a bunch of time with their knight. So I capitalized on the fact that they misplayed this, and I immediately pushed my pawn towards the center again to get tempo on this knight. And this is one of those examples of trying to capitalize on your opponent's mistakes early on when they play inaccurately. So here my opponent decides to play knight to b4, again not an ideal square at all to move the knight to, and I play the move e4. So I debated playing the move a3 here, just to kind of kick the knight back, but I didn't really need to play this move. I could do this, and this would probably just be a fine move. The knight would have to go back to the only safe square, a6, and try to get back into the game somehow. But I didn't really see the knight was doing anything on b4, and a very common thing sometimes that happens is anytime we see a piece, we just want to attack it. That's kind of our instinct. But sometimes we attack it and we're actually helping them move back to a square that they want to go to. This knight has no plans here on b4. And if I push it back, I'm not saying that it's going to have a future when it goes back to a6, but it could potentially go to c7, kind of pressure my pawn. They could consider moving all the way back to b8 and maybe trying to push this pawn forward and sneak into d7. Whatever the case, it's going to have a long process before it actually has some kind of function in this position. But if it stays on b4, it's really just not doing anything. So instead of me spending a move kicking the knight back, I thought, let me just continue dominating the center. So I pushed my pawn to e4, also threatening to play the move e5 and then hitting this knight in the center. And just supporting this pawn in d5 here, and I really liked my position. So my opponent then played takes, and I took back with the c pawn to open up my bishop's diagonal a little bit, and also because I wanted to move this pawn forward again, like I mentioned before, to attack the knight, and I wouldn't be able to do that if I took with the e pawn. So takes, and then my opponent played the move queen to b6. So this move, to me, does not make much sense, because if I was in black shoes right now, this looks very scary. My opponent just completely controls the center, and if I was black, I want to get my king safe. So, for example, the first move that I would consider playing is the move d6, because if this pawn gets to e5, that's going to be a lot of control for my opponent in the center. So at least if I play the move d6, I'm stopping this move, and if they do decide to play it, I can at least take and pressure this pawn. The next step would be to prioritize developing your minor pieces, so bringing that bishop out, and then just simply castling, and at least doing that. When my opponent plays the move queen to b6, they're committing their queen, which is a major piece, to a square which I don't quite see what it's doing. They're leaving their king in the center, and they're still allowing me to just simply push my pawn forward and now hit their next knight. So again, I'm following the basic principles by developing my knights towards the center, and I'm taking space in the center if my opponent allows me to do so. My opponent, on the other hand, their pieces are not coordinated at all. They've committed a major piece to a square that doesn't make much sense, and they're not really prioritizing their development of their minor pieces or their king's safety right now. Now my opponent plays the move knight to h5, and earlier, like I said, knights on the rim are grim. This knight's kind of sad, and again, when I see any piece in the corner, my first thought, just like I said with any piece, is to attack it. And sometimes we want to attack it, and sometimes we don't have to attack it. This is a good position to attack it, because if we look at all the squares the knight can move to, g3, f4, f6, none of them are safe squares for that knight, which means I have a chance to trap this knight. So if I attack it, it's not really going to have anywhere to go to. So the move that I play is the move g4. So I don't see any harm to my king, because all my opponent has is this knight here that can't go anywhere and this queen here that can't go anywhere. Their bishops are stuck. They're not coming out at all. My opponent's king isn't safe. So I'm just going to go ahead and snag a piece here. My opponent realizes that they can't really save the knight. So now they try to prioritize their king's safety, but it's a little too late, because I at least win a whole piece now. So in this position here, I wanted to capitalize on time. I have a very strong center. My opponent's pieces are not developed at all, and it's going to take them a while to develop and actually get to squares where it has some function. And this position is already pretty winning. I could move my bishop out, develop my other bishop. I could keep my king in the center, or I can castle it and kind of tuck it away in the corner on h1 and keep it safe behind my pawn and my knight and open up the g-file. There's a lot of ideas that I could do here, but I wanted to prioritize just basically going for the checkmate here. So I see that the king side for my opponent does not really have any defenders, because their knight on f6 is gone. This is always a nice target to look for. So following the basic principles, I develop a bishop. I develop my minor piece, but I develop it to a very strong diagonal where it has some potential to attack the pawn on h7 here. And if my opponent decides to trade knight for bishop, I'm happy, because I'm up material. And when I am up material, I want to trade pieces. So my opponent plays the move d6. Again, a move that I mentioned quite early on in the opening that they should have played before my pawn was even able to move up to e5. And now I decided, all right, they want to probably bring their bishop out. And I actually had a plan to reroute my bishop and my queen to kind of line up a battery. So the first step in that process was not to play the move a3, to decide if my opponent wanted to get rid of their knight or move it back to the corner. And they chose moving it back to the corner. So probably because they're down on material, they didn't want to trade. But I'm happy with that, because again, the knight's just kind of stuck in the corner. The queen's also stuck in the corner, and they're not really going anywhere, and they're not really looking at anything to even take. So now I continue with my plan. I move my bishop back to c2. this move opens up the d3 square, which is again where I want to put my queen to line up the battery that I talked about. And very quickly, I'm just spending my moves, trying to attack that pawn on h7 in the corner that has no protection at the moment. My opponent plays bishop g4 as I expected, and they're starting to develop their pieces now, but unfortunately it's a little bit too late for that. I play the move queen to d3, just simply attacking the pawn here. And again, this comes to what to ask yourself when you're playing a game and before you make every move. And the one thing that I always tell my students before you make a move is you always ask yourself, why did my opponent play their move? And before you make a move, you should always ask yourself, am I moving to a safe square? Now, when I played the move queen d3, my opponent did not ask themselves what was my threat, because they ended up playing the move rook to c8 and simply hanging a mate in 1. Now, the game was already pretty much over from this point. I have a very strong position here. There's not much they can do to really defend this pawn. They maybe have to play a move like g6, which is not ideal. My bishop is about to come in, and the point is it's basically still winning for whites. But this definitely comes down to like a simple thread that you just ask yourself, what's my opponent's threat? And my opponent could have hung on a little bit longer if they had found a move like g6. So again, simply from the beginning, I didn't do anything fancy. I simply developed my pieces towards the center, brought my pawns out, brought my knights out, and my opponent just made a slight mistake, and I was able to capitalize on it by simply starting to push my pawns towards the center since they allowed my pawn to stay in the center. And after my opponent's pieces got a bit disoriented, they weren't really coordinated, and they spent some moves committing their pieces to squares that did not really make sense and weren't really helping their position or their king's safety. I just simply capitalized on it, ended up winning a piece, and after that, again, just continued my development. And before it got to a late middle game, before I traded off a bunch of pieces, I was like, let me just find a way to finish off the game quickly, and found a nice battery to set up on and try to go for mate, and it ended up working. And yeah, in 15 moves, I was able to get a victory here. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you found the analysis helpful, and hope to be posting more of these videos for these series coming up in the future weeks. So thank you so much for watching, and see you guys in the next one. Bye bye.